Hello, BookTube, and this is the last week, or video for the last week of February fantasy stories, and it's urban fiction. And I've cheated a little bit with this because uh, I did not go outside. Well, it was partially because of not having some stuff, and I wasn't sure where to go with sort of contemporary modern writers of that subgenre. So I stuck with an oldie and a goodie, Kanaki. And this is the casebook of Kanaki, the Ghost Finder, written by William Hope Hodgson. He wrote 9 stories in total. The original 6 were written from 1912 1913, around 1912 1913, and published in a book. And there were 3 other stories. One that was never published that's in here, and it was originally put in the complete Karnaki by August Derleth in his Arkham House collection. Now, they are short stories, as I say. For the most part, they're 20 pages long, give or take, except 2, basically. One is the last one that was written, called The Hog, uh, and I think, appeared in the late 20s, I think, in and Weird fan or Weird magazine. Tales of the Weird, sorry, and then a smaller one, the one that was never published before until August Derleth put it together, is called The Find. Now, they are Karnaki is a sort of a gentleman ghost hunter, as it says. He's a paranormal detective. He gets hired to go and investigate um, strange things. And I won't go into each story specifically, but he basically as I say, he gets hired and he investigates, and sometimes he finds paranormal aspects to the story, and sometimes he finds that they are people, like human creations for this, and sometimes a combination of both. For instance, he gets asked to a house that or a castle. Well, there's 2 castles actually, but the one has been derelict for a long time, and strange happenings had been going on there at times. It was sort of a haunt, excuse the pun, but for homeless people, and they would sleep in would break in and sleep in there, and 2 were found dead in the hallway. But the building was bought and wanted to be renovated, and they there is all this stories about the castle being haunted. So Karnaki, is hired to investigate this, and there's a bit of humor in this as well, because he sets up all his equipment. He's got state of the art technology. Uh, Wax cylinders to record, a flashlight to take pictures at night, a flash, but he refers it to as flashlight, on glass plates. Leading edge technology here. And he's got something called a what's he call it here? He calls it an electric pentacle, and he creates a sort of a circle that will isolate the people inside from paranormal or supernatural forces. But it's sort of electrical, and it's run by vacuum tubes. So again, leading edge technology here, especially for the time. And there's a great deal throughout the stories of him, meticulously talking about how he sets this up with the vacuum tubes and where he places everything, the colors that will be emanated from this, and the use of the colors. But he also refers to like 500, 600 year old rituals and other magic books that he uses in his investigations. And he doesn't go in always with a mind that it is human related or ghostly related. He tries to keep his mind open to the possibilities. And at times he'll spend like weeks going over meticulously the building, if it happens to be a building, knocking on the walls, looking for, hidden rooms and all this kind of stuff. And he'll spend a long time doing this. And then he usually, spends the night there. But there's humorous aspects because when something happens at times, he runs almost screaming from the place, But then he gets enough nerve back, and he uses an interesting term at times that he gets the creeps for this, the feeling of something happening. And one story to do with uh, another castle is the whistling room, where there is a room in this castle where there's a whistling sound that comes from it. So, and he seals up all the doors and stuff like this too, and he anywhere where there's entrances, he puts things in case somebody comes in, like a hair across the doorway, so if it gets broken, then it shows that something physical has passed through there. But with the whispering room, and I like I say, I won't go into too many details, but a few. This was quite interesting. I thought it was quite neat, really. And he thinks, he sets up his recording devices, wax cylinders, but it doesn't record anything. But you can hear it. It gets really loud, the whistling. And they feel a presence and a weirdness in the room as well. But then at some point he hears voices, and he thinks, oh, it's guaranteed, it's people that are doing this, actual humans. But that turns out to be a bit of a red herring. And he's away for a while, so he comes back, and he gets a ladder, and he goes up to the room, and he can hear the whistling. And when he looks at, like, the floor is apparently like stone floor, but it bubbles up, and it turns into sort of lips and a hole that whistles through the floor. And then the wall does this as well with lips. And it turns out that there's an old story that has been told, like a rival, land um, owners, kings or whatever. That there was a jester for the one that created a song, in honor of his protector. But he gets sort of taken over, and the other guy gets killed, and the sort of the bad one takes the jester, cuts out his tongue so he can't sing the song, but he can still whistle. And it's like a curse basically, and he whistles the song, and that's what the whistling is this song. And so it's pure supernatural in that case, and the only way to divest the building of this is just literally tear the room down, sealing every little bit, and put it in a blast furnace. And but the other one that I was talking about, the other castle, it's like, he does sneak up again after running away. It sort of reminded me of, in some ways, like Scooby-Doo in a sense. And I think Scooby-Doo has some basis in Kanaki in a sense, because they're investigating, well, it's a long sort of tradition of this kind of thing, supernatural detectives. But it just specifically, it reminded me of that, where he runs away, scared for this, or they find out that it's human. Scooby-Doo is always it's human related, or generally. But in Kanaki, it's like sometimes there's a human element, but there's also a supernatural element. And he admits at times that he doesn't know the answer to all these things. He doesn't know the reason behind these things. But he can't, like, he does know through his research and experience how to get around the supernatural world, the evil aspects or the ghosts, and get rid of them for his clients. And there's even a ship that he goes on, and the only way that he solves sort of that is because the ship sinks. The last one, called the Hog, which is the biggest one, is I like it in some ways, because he goes into this meticulous detail of what he's doing and stuff like this, and talking about other you know layers of evil around basically hell, I guess it is. But maybe out in space or something, because it's a little unclear, but it's a little strange because it's got literally to do with hogs and pigs, and there's one guy that's grunting all the time like a pig. Uh, just a little too over the top for me. But the other one, the one that was never published before, is the shortest story. It's not really to do with supernatural so much, not really at all, because it's got to do with, there was a book that was written and given to Queen Elizabeth, and it was only one copy that was made, and it's this guy's a book on acrostics, and everything was, he says he destroyed everything, the plates, the everything, the manuscript. There's only one copy, but then all of a sudden somebody comes up with a second copy. So, and they compare it to what's in the museum, and they say it's authentic. But Karnacki is, there's something, hairs on the back of his neck, or, there's something false here. So I won't go into the details of this, because it is a neat little story of forgery, book forgery, which is really, really cool, of the way he describes it. Not so much possible, I don't think, at the time so much. But so in some ways, like with the tube and this electric what's it called, a pentacle, it's in some ways there's a bit of science fiction in there, because he's using science, the vacuum tubes and radio, but he's creating something else with this. So a little bit, and they're just fun stories, and they're told in an interesting way, like almost like Dr. Watson telling the tales of Sherlock Holmes in that way. And the one character that's doing this is Dodgson, sort of a a thinly veiled Hodgson. And what it is Karnacki will send cards to four people, including one of them, the Dodgson, to come and have dinner with him at 7 o'clock on a night. And he's very particular. They don't talk during dinner. Like, there might be a few words mentioned before the dinner, but they don't talk at all generally through the dinner. And then they retire to sort of sitting, and Karnacki sits in his favorite plush chair in front of the fire, and smokes a pipe, and then launches into his story, usually his most latest case, and it's just a long narration of what happened and the solution. And this is all told by Dodgson, and then at the end of basically every story, he just says, "Out you go." And they all sort of, trundle out and go home. This is at nighttime, and they're on the embankment in London, and they go home. And all these stories, as I say, has a bit of an older, even than this, tradition. It's sort of in the vein of Sherlock Holmes, and some of these things, like with the tales of these houses, and the um, curses in a sense on the families. Reminds me of like the Musgrave ritual, where there's something to be found, or the Hound of the Baskervilles. Something that happened in the past. Like there's a horse is showing here because there's a story with a horse, basically an invisible horse that plagues the female descendants when they're being betrothed, and a lot of times they get killed, or their suitor gets killed. And this is happening again, so he gets called in. But there's a combination there. There is a real physical supernatural horse, but then also there is a human aspect, a cousin, who is part of this as well. So it takes that the Sherlock Holmes type thing, but puts the supernatural or potentially supernatural elements into it. But it's also there's it goes back to stuff like uh, there was Sheridan Le Fanu had sort of supernatural aspects to his stories, and somebody investigating, Van Helsing from Dracula. Algernon Blackwood had his John Silence, investigative, and Sax Rohmer had what's his Morris Claw, and there's a whole bunch of others, and then it's been carried on, and like this is very slim, so there's only, as I say, 9 stories in here. It's like 180 pages wet, and I wish there were more. I really enjoyed them. Like I read them a long, long time ago, and I remembered them. And so when this came up, and when I was explained what urban fantasy sort of was, and I go, "Oh, Kanaki!" I just all of a sudden remembered, because it was so long ago, and I thought, yeah, I really want to reread those. So, and I was hoping I could get to some John Silence one and the Maurice Claw, but I just haven't. But I think I will pull those out at some point, or try to get some copies of it. I have some electronic ones, but they're ones that I remember really, really liking, so I probably will want actual books of those at some point. So yeah, so I was quite excited to do this, and and as part, so I'm really glad that I've joined in with the February Fantasies stories. And I originally wasn't, because I didn't want to get into fantasy, but I find that I still didn't actually go outside of my wheelhouse. I suppose I thought I was going to, or I tried a couple times. The first was classic, and I had to, and I sort of mentioned this already, but I'll just hash it over a little more quickly. The Anne and Jeff Vandermeer's collection, and I read some of the first ones, and I was sort of surprised in some ways to be confronted with, um, fairy tale stories, which I never really thought of. But it is fantasy, yes, but it was something that I never really sort of connected the dots. I never thought of before, and which is fine, which is great, and but they didn't sort of satisfy me for that. The only thing that did was the Edgar Allan rereading Edgar Allan Poe again, the case of Michel Valdieu, which I really liked. But I always considered that as horror. But that's also apparently dark fantasy, and that was the third week last week, and I read some stuff from a series, Tales of the Weird, by the British Museum, edited by British Library, sorry, by Mike Ashley, and that's the kind of stuff, because to me that is true horror. Something can be horrific, but the horror to me has to have a supernatural element. And I never really thought of ghost stories as horror per se. Um, and apparently, like from dark fantasy, ghost stories are separate, according to Mike Ashley there. So I don't really know. But things like vampires and dark and just the plain weird is dark fantasy and things that don't really have heroes so much, I guess. But then there's the grimoire, or uh, uh, grim dark, which I know nothing about. I didn't investigate that, which I might at some point. But I think that is a newer phenomena, rather than dark fantasy. Is also new, but it's a new term. But it looks like then it's been put on to a label put on to older stuff as well, which then sort of makes sense, I guess, and all this. So that was enjoyable to see and read some of those. There was, again, a couple that were fairy tale types that didn't quite work for me. But the first, like Fitz James O'Brien, who also wrote some stuff that sort of fit in with this kind of the supernatural detective as well. Who I definitely want to read more now. I've read before in the past, but I want to read more of his stuff because the story that was in there was perfect. Now we come to the second week. Or go back to the second week, which was Sword and Sorcery, and I read some Conan stories, the original Conan stories that Robert E. Howard. And I'm not sure if I have ever read any of the original stories, and it was the ones that were sort of augmented and other pastiche ones that I read, which I kind of like those from memory. These ones I didn't really get along with that very well, and I found them very simplistic. And I can understand why people like them, but just tales of people fighting with swords and stuff like that, I find boring. I like the hacking up of bodies and stuff like that. I don't find that interesting. I never really have. There has to be more to it, and there were glimpses of this in the stories, but it just, like I say, there were glimpses and glossed over and then moved on, which those were the things that I wanted to see more. I wanted to see more of the background, but but I can understand the the appeal of Conan, and Conan works so well with comics and stuff like that, because there is this very light, and sort of light in a different way, but there's no real depth of story or character. It's very it's simplistic in some ways, not, and I don't mean in a derogatory way, just that it's a bit simplistic. So it works for that, and it works for film, and it works for all that kind of stuff, and that's why I think that's the how it has endured, because it's easily, you don't lose. In other words, you don't lose much by adapting it to a comic book or TV, or I mean film, really much at all. You don't lose much with Conan, where you lose a lot of times with a lot of other things when you go from one media to another. I don't know if they've ever done Conan on the radio. I just that dawned on me. I wonder if they have. I've never come across it, and I've which I'm tempted to say they haven't, unless it's something sort of recent. If anybody knows, do let me know in the comments below, because I'd be curious to know. But getting back to Karnaki, like there's been, like I say, with the Conan, there's been the other writers to pastiches, and there's a lot of writing that's been with Karnaki as well. I haven't really read any of it. I haven't. I don't think I've read any of it, so I do want to look it up a little bit. And there's one thing that I found out, because I do know Kim Newman has written a series of Diogenes clubs, mysteries that they investigate supernatural things, which sound very interesting, because Diogenes Club is obviously the club um, from Sherlock Holmes. Or Sherlock Holmes' brother's club, uh, um, Mycroft Holmes' club, and I think Karnaki is mentioned at times. So I'm quite interested in exploring some of that other stuff now, since I've reacquainted myself with Karnaki, because it's got to be close to 40 years ago that I read these. I don't know exactly when, but But yeah, so I'm starting to reacquaint myself with a lot of my reading with older stuff that I read before, or and then moving out from that and grabbing other stuff. So yeah, so this has been interesting. So that's just a bit of a wrap up as well of February fantasy stories, and looking forward to the New Worlds November, which will be the science fiction one again this year, and possibly another one that the Bookish Bryants are working on. We discussed the possibility of horror, so I'll just leave that as tantalizing little bits at the end. Anyway, take care, BookTube, and any comments, anything, just sound out in the comment section or send me an email. Take care, BookTube.